Fragmented?
Yes, fragmented. And I think that it's essential that both the various players in that fragmented environment understand each other's jurisdictions, the limits of their jurisdictions. I think it's essential that there's good information sharing between them. And I think it's also important that the general public, that the service providers, that employees also have access to information that explains that fragmented system. I mean, I think it can work, and I think in Queensland, in relation to the aged care space, and certainly more recently, it works fairly well because we have a fairly close working relationship with the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. We speak to them quite regularly, both at officer level and at more senior levels, and we think we have a good understanding of each other's jurisdiction.
So sometimes fragmentation is a result of different policy considerations. So, for example, in the information sharing space, it may be that you've got some philosophy within the state that you ought not to reveal information too willingly or that kind of thing. And it may partly be based upon the experiences, so that in one place you might have just had an experience that brought to light something, so you've acted upon it immediately and implemented immediately. So fragmentation can be caused by all sorts of things. And sometimes you end up with best practices emerging, which others then can pick up. Does that suggest that we should put our faith in fragmentation, or should we say, no, it's much better to have a unified national system and hope for the best that way?
I think that's a difficult public policy question to answer.
That's why I'm asking you.
And I think there are, we work in a system of federation, and there are different, constitutional limitations on the ability of either the Commonwealth or the state. So I think it's a product of the system that we have, and it gets back to my point that I think fragmentation, if you call it that, can work if there's good cooperation and clear understanding of how it works. And I think that's really, I think we're stuck to some degree because of the system we work in with a level of fragmentation, and it's about trying to make that work.
Well, the last question then to you before we go to C is, but from the point of view of, as it were, a practitioner, where you're you as the ombudsman, do you think you'd get a better system or a worse system if we changed it in the way that we've just been talking about?
I guess it sounds like I'm dodging the question, but I think it's very hard to answer because I think there are pros and cons to both. I think there are national systems that are just going to be too big and too cumbersome to work properly.
That's a fair answer.
So I think it's difficult.
Well, C's not very far down the alphabet, but far enough for these purposes.
Look, I think the different regulatory schemes that do apply in, if I can sort of talk broadly about the health system, work well, and I think I endorse what Andrew has said in relation to working together. I think that is critical to having, where you have a number of regulatory agencies dealing with different aspects of a service and a sector more broadly, and that is really important and key. Things like memoranda of understanding can assist with the understanding what the roles and responsibilities are of each different agency. But at the end of the day, we have to work well together, because that fragmentation can potentially lead to people slipping through the cracks, and that's what we want to avoid at all cost.
Thank you. Ms Reid?
I would just have to say that as a national body, it does make it difficult to understand the different laws that are around the country to be able to think about referring.
But you'd like it sort of all brought into harmony together?
Yeah, harmonised laws would be very nice from my own personal perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final comments about how the system is working or not working?
not from my perspective, thank you.
Well, I think you've probably earned yourselves a cup of tea. Shall we adjourn till 11 o'clock?
Thank you, Commissioner.
All stand. The Royal Commissioner Project 11 a.m. all stand. Please be seated.
Mr. Rosen?
Commissioners, before I formally call the next two witnesses, who are both senior officers with the Commonwealth Department of Health, Ms Morgan, who represents the Commonwealth, wishes to raise a matter briefly that she's discussed with me.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
I don't have a microphone, so I'm hoping that's okay.
We'll come over here.
Thank you. On Monday, Commissioners, a matter was raised by Professor Polaires in relation to communication with the Minister's Office. Both Council Assisting and yourself, Commissioner Pagoni, raised some disquiet in relation to his evidence. I've provided documents to Council Assisting and they're now on the system. And if I could call up CTH 1000 0003 5889. This, Commissioners, is a two-page letter dated the 21st of September 2008 from Minister Wyatt to Professor Polaires. In that, one of the issues the Minister raises is an offer to Professor Polaires to continue in a role and be paid for that role by the government. As it happens, Professor Polaires did not take up that opportunity, and I don't need to take that any further. The next document I'd like to show you, which will be formally tendered by Council for the Commission, is CTH 1000 0003 5922. This is an email chain that travels over 5 pages, and if I could ask the operator to go to 5924. It commences here with Mr Nicholas Hartland, who was then the Chief of Staff for Minister Wyatt, who communicated with Professor Polaires in early January following a conversation they had had, going through, on the advice of the Department of Health, the various recommended strategic actions and what was occurring in relation to those strategic actions. Professor Polaires replies to that on the 9th of January, which is the previous page, 5923. And as you'll see there, at about point 6 of the page, Professor Polaires there says, well, is it appreciated? I think the department hasn't done justice to the brief they were given. This may be consistent with what Professor Polaires was saying in the witness box. In response, Nicholas Hartland responds to Professor Polaires, and the rest of the email chain travelling on to 5922 is an attempt for a continued dialogue with Professor Polaires in relation to the matters he raises. That was all I wanted to raise.
Well, thank you for that, I think. What is the message that you think this establishes? I mean, I can see the words on the bits of paper, but what do you think it goes...
Commissioner, I was concerned in court on Monday
Yes.
that there was a suggestion of disappointment and discouragement expressed by the Commission and Council Assisting.
I think I used the word discouraging in response to his word disappointment.
Yes, so I used both. So this is addressing that. We profoundly, somebody said profoundly, I think it was you? No. This is to address that. It was the community.
But does it show that there should be no disappointment?
In relation to the specific matter raised by Professor Polaires, which I had understood, Commissioner, that was what you had expressed concern about,
yes.
Because the way it was put was that the Minister's office had not responded to Professor Polaires' continued request.
I think I probably took it a little bit broader than just a non-response. I thought it was a matter of that not enough was being done. But
I understand the Commission is looking at that as an issue, and the evidence now will address that issue, and there are many documents we say which also addresses that issue at a much broader level.
But you are quite right. At one stage you did say that he'd sent an email and there was no response at all.
That's correct.
And this is what you're saying shows that there was in fact a response.
That's correct.
I see. Thank you for that. That's
Thank you.
helpful. Thank you.
Two things, Commissioners. I understood from what was just said that there was an expectation that Council Assisting would tender the email chain. I'm quite content for it to be part of the evidence before the Royal Commission, and it'll be added to the general tender bundle in due course, along with the correspondence in the form of the letter dated the 21st of September 2018. Without wanting to take up too much time at this point, this all arose in the transcript at pages 5812 to 5813, and you will recall, Commissioner Pagoni, that you asked, and this is at line 40 on 5812, you asked Professor Pelaez, when you say that you haven't had a response to your letter, do you mean by that there's not even been an acknowledgement of receipt of your letter? And the answer to that was at line 44. So I got an email response that it was all of the past programs of government. I went back and said, look, that isn't sufficient. I'm asking for a step-by-step response. I didn't get a response to that email. You said at all, to which Professor Pelaez said at all. And it was at that point that I said that has got to be profoundly disappointing, as had been indicated by my learned friend, Ms Morgan. So the state of the evidence is perhaps a little bit unsatisfactory in that, and this is no criticism of anyone because these things happen very quickly, but Professor Pelaez never had an opportunity to see these documents and to respond to them. Perhaps the best way forward would be that the solicitors for the Royal Commission provide these to him, give him an opportunity to make any further written response that he wants, and then that would, I think, close the loop in the circumstances.
Well, you might want to think about what you want to do with it. It may be that the first thing is to look at the bits that you've just read out, because on one view, what you've just read out and what we've just been told by the documents that Ms Morgan showed us are entirely consistent.
Indeed.
And if that be so, then the disappointing and or discouragement may still exist. But once you've had a careful look at it, you'll work out whether you need to go any further or not.
We'll do that, and we'll keep the Commonwealth's lawyers apprised of what we do.
Well, careful what you promise.
I always am, Commissioner, especially on transcript.
Well, Mr Rosen,
With that slight distraction out, sorry, Commissioner.
let's proceed.
We'll proceed. I formally call Glenys Beecham and Charles Wan.
I solemnly and sincerely
I solemnly and sincerely
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Please repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence that I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mr Rosen, just on housekeeping, because the last two witnesses appeared pursuant to a subpoena, I think I possibly should, on record, formally excuse them so that they are not the subject of action for failing to be in the hearing, so they're formally excused.
They'd have what would be very close to a defence because I did that on your behalf.
I think
Perhaps not technically a
it's
defence.
not technically a defence, Mr
Close.
Rosen, but
I accept that. Thank you,
nonetheless,
Commissioner.
we've done it formally. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do this alphabetically. Ms Beecham, can I start with you, please? Could you state for the purposes of the transcript your full name?
Glenys Ann Beecham.
Thank you. And Ms Beecham, you're the Secretary of the Department of Health, that is the Commonwealth Department of Health,
Yes.
and it's a position you've held since 2017.
Yes.
In a previous statement you provided to the Royal Commission dated the 4th of February 2019, which is Exhibit 1-23, you've set out details of your personal and professional background,
I have.
and you've also explained the structure of the Department of Health so far as it applies to aged care to the Royal Commission.
That's correct.
I won't ask you to repeat that evidence. It's already before the Commission, but you can take it that that's understood. To the extent that you need to go over any of that in the course of your evidence today, then please do so. And if you'd be assisted by that statement appearing on the screen, which I see it just has done, if there's anything you'd like to take us to, then of course indicate that to me and we'll organise for that to be done.
Thank you.
For the purposes of this particular hearing, which is examining workforce matters, you have provided us with a further witness statement, the code of which is WIT.0379.0002.0001, a statement dated the 20th of September 2019. Is that right?
That's correct.
And before I seek to tender that, are there two typographical errors in it that you would like to correct at this point?
Yes, thank you.
The first, as I understand it, is on page 5 in the table which appears halfway down the page. In the first cell in row 9, rather than the figure 4 appearing, it should say APS 4.
That's correct.
Is that right? You'd seek to make that correction.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. And at paragraph 21, which is on page 0004, the reference to, in the first line, the reference to 583 FTE should read 584 FTE.
That's correct.
And you'd seek to make that change at this point as well.
Yes, please.
Other than that, are the contents of your statement true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I tender the statement of Glenys Beecham, dated the 20th of September 2019. Commissioners?
Yes, that'll be Exhibit 11-71.
Mr Wan, could you please state for the transcript your full name?
Charles Samuel Wan.
And you are the First Assistant Secretary, Aged Care Reform and Compliance in the Department of Health?
Aged Care Reform and Compliance Division, yes.
Division, thank you. I wasn't quite sure what the word was at the end there. Division in the Department of Health. Do you answer directly to Ms Beecham?
I answer to Dave Hallinan,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary for the Aged Care Group.
Okay, thank you. He in turn answers to Ms Beecham?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, okay, thank you. You have made a witness statement for the purposes of the Royal Commission, which is WIT.0379.0001.0001. Is that right?
Yes.
And your statement dated the 20th of September 2019 also contains some minor typographical errors. Is
Yes.
that right? Is the first of those at paragraph 60 on page 11?
Yes.
And the error is in the designation of the exhibit number in the second last line.
Yes.
Instead of being GAB 2-5, it should be CW1.
Yes.
Thank you. And you'd seek to make that change.
Yes.
The second is on the following page, page 12, 62A1. Instead of, it's once again the exhibit number GAB 26 should be CW1.
That's correct.
The third is on that same page in 62A Roman 2, GAB 27 should be CW1.
That's correct.
Is that right? And finally, in Appendix A to the statement, or actually Annexure A to be more accurate, in relation to Strategic Action 13, which is on page .0039, in the third column there should be the word high should appear. Is that right?
That's correct.
That is the priority for that strategic action is high.
That's right.
Thank you. With those changes being made, is your statement Are the contents of your statement true and correct?
Yes.
10 of the statement of Charles Wan, also dated the 20th of September 2019, Commissioners.
All right, that'll be Exhibit 11-72.
Now, if I can address you in the first instance, Ms Beecham, and ask you to confirm that you and Mr Wan are jointly giving evidence in response to a notice to give information that was served by the Royal Commission on the Department of Health.
That's correct.
And for completeness, the notice to give is numbered 0-379. And in your statements, you have divided up the task of answering the questions that we asked in that notice to give. Is that right?
That's correct.
In broad summary, you, Ms Beecham, have responded to questions that were directed to the department about its own aged care workforce, if I can call it that. Firstly, they're questions that you've answered, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you've also answered questions about whether there should be a registration or conduct scheme for the aged care workforce.
Yes.
Is that right? Mr Wan, you have responded to the remaining questions that were asked in the notice, most of which relate to broader questions of workforce planning for the aged care sector.
That's correct.
Yeah. Can I start? And I'll direct this question initially at you, Ms Beecham, and I should indicate to both of you that I'll be directing my questions at one or the other of you, but the one to whom the question has not been directed shouldn't feel shy, and if you've got something to add, then we invite you to do so. So with those rules in place, if I can start with you, Ms Beecham, and I want to ask you some questions about leadership and stewardship of the aged care workforce. So I think I can, without fear of contradiction, indicate to you that one of the themes that's run through the evidence this week, and I should ask you, I know you haven't been in the hearing room during the week, but have you followed the evidence that's been given by other witnesses during the course of the hearing?
Most of it, yes.
And can I ask how you've done that? Have you been following it on the website, or have summaries been provided to you by your officers?
Primarily sitting at my desk, doing my work and having meetings with the Royal Commission on my web stream.
Right, okay. You'll have seen then that a number of witnesses have been asked questions about their views about the role of the Commonwealth in respect of workforce planning, remuneration, and so on. And we've heard from a number of witnesses, both this week and earlier, that there is a need for a strong Commonwealth leadership and stewardship of the aged care workforce. So I'd ask you to accept that proposition, and I'd also ask you to accept that we've heard that from representatives of approved providers. We've heard it from representatives of unions who have coverage of workers that are working in the sector. And we've also heard it from academics and commentators who've given evidence during the course of the hearing. I'd like to read out to you some small extracts of the transcript just to give you an indication of what it is that has been said. Firstly, I'd like to refer you to the evidence of Professor Polaires. This is transcript page 5812 at line 10. And Professor Polaires was asked this by counsel assisting. You've identified the five strategic actions in his task force report, which fall into that category in the right-hand column of your statement there. And we note you say that you are yet to hear the government's response in relation to those five, and perhaps we could list them. And then without reading the rest of that, the five strategic actions are read out. And at line 20, counsel assisting asked Professor Polaires, do you mean by that there's been no formal announcement about the government's implementation of those strategic actions? And his answer was, yes, in fact, there's been no detailed response at all to each of those recommendations, but for a pre-election commitment to fund the Aged Care Centre for Growth and Translational Research. I'll leave the reading of that at that point. In addition, we have heard evidence from the acting chairman of the Aged Care Industry Council, that is the body that's been established to oversee the implementation of the strategic actions in the Polaris Task Force report. And Mr McCoy, who holds that position, told the Commission of his dealings with the department and expressed concerns about the department's response to his overtures to seek funding from the department to assist the council in the work that it's doing. So I guess from all that, my initial question of you, Ms Beecham, is what's your perception of the department's role in relation to leadership of aged care workforce reform matters?
Thank you. I think we do absolutely have a leadership role in terms of workforce matters in the aged care system. And if I could add to that, it's not just the department, it's across the Commonwealth more broadly. And we do have a strong role to play on a number of fronts.
A couple of things arising out of that. What other parts of the Commonwealth would you consider have a role in relation to leadership?
In relation to leadership?
Yes. You said it's not just the Department of Health, it's
And I think
aspects?
when we're talking about leadership of the workforce and the Commonwealth's role,
yes,
there are a number of agencies involved in workforce matters and do indeed play a leadership role. For example, the Department of Education around higher education, particularly for the professional streams in health, when you're talking to nurses, physios, doctors and the like. There's also the Department of Employment and Small Business, Family and Small Business, that do take a role in establishing vocational education and training system and skills for job seekers and matching up available jobs with job seekers, and do actually take a leadership role in ensuring that the vocational education and training system and the competencies that go with that meet the needs of industry. And there's been, as we've heard this week, the set-up of the committee under the Department of Employment. There's also the Department of Immigration that provides fills workforce gaps and shortages through the Skills Migration Program for us, and we work closely with the Department of Home Affairs as well on that. And of course, us in the Department of Health have a very big role to play to ensure we've got the skills and competency and attitude of workers to support the needs of clients in care, whether it's residential aged care facilities, home care or other elderly people accessing the system. So there's a lot of areas of the Commonwealth that do take a leadership role. How do we bring that together? And I think that's important in terms of leadership, if I can just expand on that. So I chair what we call a social policy committee with the Department of Social Services Secretary that looks at a range of matters impacting across health, disability, social services, employment, and a range of other matters impacting on social services. And within that context, there's work we're doing to look at workforce needs going forward, particularly in the social services area, and in particular looking at the care workforce, whether it's across disability, whether it's across aged care or indeed other social services. So there's a piece of work going on under the Social Policy Committee. So that's an opportunity to bring us all together to address these issues.
Thank you. See if I can unpack that a little bit. Professor Polaris, when he gave evidence on Monday, indicated to the Royal Commission that based on his conversations with then Minister Wyatt in respect of setting up the task force, his understanding from Minister Wyatt was that the task force was intended to be a different process to the various government reports that had previously been released. And when I say government reports, I'm talking about Productivity Commission, which has reported on the aged care workforce. The Australian Law Reform Commission has reported on matters to do with the aged care workforce, as have various parliamentary committees. His evidence was the task force report was to be different. It was to be more practically oriented and able to be implemented by industry and government working together. That's what he told us. Is that also your understanding of the intention behind the setting up of the task force?
Yes, it is.
It was established at the time when you were Secretary of the Department.
Yes.
It was a key reform by the government in 2018, was it not, the establishment of the task force?
Yes, it was.
And the task force, of course, outlined 14 strategic actions. And Professor Pillaire's evidence, which I've just read out to you, is that he had not received, as at Monday of this week, he'd not received any formal response from the government to the report and the 14 strategic actions. You understand that's the evidence he gave us?
Yes, and I think Ms Morgan has just updated
Yes.
and provided further evidence to show that the government did broadly support the recommendations or the findings of the task force and the strategic actions. And in that following email, I think it was separately identified what the specific responses were from the department conveyed to Professor Pillaire's.
But you know what a formal response by government is to a report like that is, don't you? It's a publicly produced document setting out the government's response to recommendations, or in this case, strategic actions. That's a formal response by government to a report of that nature, isn't it?
A formal response can take many forms.
Yes.
Indeed, we have provided input into providing a response to each of those recommendations. And I think probably actions speak louder than words in actually doing things and taking action on a number of the strategic items that have been identified, of which we've been engaging Professor Pillaire's in that and going through the normal government processes to make sure we can implement the task force recommendations where it is our responsibility, and where Minister Wyatt had already said on behalf of government they broadly support the task force findings.
Ms Beecham, is your evidence that the email which was tendered this morning on behalf of by me, but at the request of the Commonwealth, constitutes a formal response to the Pillaire's task force report?
Commissioner, can I just interrupt just for one moment?
Well, I think the witness should answer the question.
Could I just speak to my friend before I say anything further?
Yes, I think you should go offline and speak to him.
Thank you.
Ms Beecham, I'm asking you whether there has been a formal response by the government to the Pillaire's task force report. This arises from evidence that Professor Pillaire's gave, and I'll reread it for the benefit of everyone here. He was asked, line 20, page 5812, do you mean by that there's been no formal announcement about the government's implementation of those strategic actions? And his answer was, yes, in fact, there's been no detailed response at all to each of those recommendations, but for a pre-election commitment to fund the Aged Care Centre for Growth and Translational Research. He then went on in his evidence to refer to correspondence with the Minister. I'm not asking you about that. I understand that the documents that have been tendered go to that second point, that is communication between Professor Polaires and the Minister. For the moment, I'm confining myself to questions of you about whether the government has made a formal response. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do understand that. And if I could just comment, you've made two comments, whether there's been formal announcements or a
Yes.
formal response. And I just wanted to clarify that there's been a number of government announcements about broadly accepting the findings of the task force.
Yes. And they are announcements that were made by Minister Wyatt?
Yes,
Yes.
and there have also been announcements made about particular strategic actions contained in the task force report about this. For example, the establishment of the Workforce Industry Council, the establishment and announcement of the Workforce Industry Committee within the Department of Employment, the announcement around the establishment of the Growth Centre, for example, which I think you commented on in the transcript.
Yes.
So there have been a number of announcements related to the task force recommendations.
I want to ask you about one of the documents that's been provided to the Royal Commission in relation to this question of whether or not a formal response should be made to the task force. It's tab 226 of the General Tender Bundle, if that could please be brought up on the screen. This document's headed Ministerial Information Request, addressed to Minister Wyatt, copy to Minister Hunt, issue government response to the aged care workforce strategy. Can you tell the Commission what this document is? Is this a briefing note prepared by the Department for the Ministers, Ms Beecham?
Yes, it looks like a briefing note prepared by the department.
Okay. Have you seen this before?
Only for preparation for today's appearance.
Okay. If it assists you at all, I'll ask that the fourth page be brought up, which is 5210. You'll see there that a contact officer is identified, Tanya Brown, and a clearance officer, Anthony Speed. Does that assist you at all in explaining to the Commission the nature of the document, or have you sufficiently explained to us what it is?
I think I've confirmed that's a document from the department signed off by two employees.
Right. You said you'd seen it in preparation to give evidence today. Does that mean you hadn't seen it at the time that it was conveyed to the ministers?
That's correct.
Okay. If we can go back to page 1 for the moment, you'll see that there's a heading background, government response to the aged care workforce strategy. Do you see that about a third of the way down the page?
Yes, I do.
And it's noted there that the strategy was released on the 13th of September 2018, and then the author of the document has written, the strategy was developed by an industry-led task force and identified actions for industry to implement. It was not a review developed for government and consequently does not require a formal government response. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And it's right, isn't it, that the briefing note was a document which was telling the ministers why it was not necessary for the government to respond to the Polaires report. Is that a fair characterisation of this document, Ms Beecham?
Council, can I just clarify the question?
Sure.
I think you said that this was a document about not responding to the report.
Yes.
And indeed, we've taken a number of actions to respond to actions in the report. I think you're talking about a formal public written response.
Well,
Are you?
I'm just reading the document, Ms Beecham, but it would seem to refer to a formal public government response? Yes. So do you want me to repeat the question?
So I think it does, and it's not probably the words I would have used, but I think it's saying that because Professor Pelaez was very focused on such a report being industry-led and being independent of government, it wasn't necessarily important or critical to provide a formal public response to each of the strategic items.
Well, I suggest to you that's not the reason why the briefing note says that a formal response was not required. If you go to the second page, you'll see that the departmental officer who wrote it, and Mr. Speed is a senior officer within the department, is he not?
That's correct.
What's his position?
He's the Assistant Secretary, and if I can just refer to my statement.
Certainly.
Apologies. He's heads up one of our branches, but I just want to get you the right.
Can I?
Mr. Wan, I think, can assist us?
He now works for me.
I see.
I don't know what his role was in that context, but he's currently the Assistant Secretary for Compliance, Aged Care Compliance Operations Branch.
Thank you. Ms. Beecham, if I can draw your attention to the first complete paragraph on the second page of this document. Do you see, it says, release of a formal response to the strategy would carry several risks for government. Do you see that?
I can see that, yes.
Including the following. There's 4 dot points set out. I don't want to take you through each of them, but I would like to, and you read them all if you need to answer this question. It said that one of the risks to government would be that it would invite renewed criticism of the absence of similar responses to other aged care review reports, including the legislative review of aged care and the review of national aged care quality regulatory processes. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And perhaps for completeness, the third dot point, it said that a further risk for government is that a formal government response will invite public statements by key stakeholder groups, drawing renewed attention to sensitive matters such as staff ratios, aged care funding, access to health services for older Australians and service quality. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So it's not saying, is it, that we don't need to respond because this was an industry-led process. That's not the reason behind the advice not to respond, is it?
This was a view of officers at the time. I probably wouldn't have couched it in those terms myself.
But nonetheless, it is the formal advice that was provided to the ministers by the department, isn't it, on this question?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And I suggest to you that the advice is technically we don't need to respond to this report because it's not a formal government report. Do you agree with that?
I'm just pausing because I'm not sure what a formal government report is. Professor Pelaez was very clear in terms of the approach around the task force that he wanted to ensure that he took industry players with him in this, and responsibility for implementation of the task force, as you have said, it was joint between both the government and industry players. So he took that attitude that he was really trying to mobilise momentum across the industry sector.
Ms Beecham, I'd ask you please to try and answer my question if you can. I suggest to you that the advice, the formal advice that was provided to the ministers on this topic, on the question of whether there should be a formal response to the Pelaez report, was to use the words of the document, it's not a review developed for government and therefore doesn't require a formal government response. That, I suggest to you, is a rather technical point to be making. What do you say to that?
Yes, that's correct, how it's written.
And what's more, the detailed reasoning for why it's not appropriate to make a response suggests that if a response was made, it could cause some embarrassment to the government because it hasn't responded to other reports. Do you agree with that?
I subject to that statement on two bases. One is Mr. Rosen is chopping and changing between page 1 and page 2. The witness does not have the document in the witness box. The witness has page 2 highlighted and extract. So if Mr. Rosen is going to refer to other parts of the document, can you please have it up on the screen? But more specifically, he's describing, he is conflating the concept of risk and whether or not a response is necessary. And I think those two things are clear on the face of the document and should be kept clear for the question to the Secretary.
Mr. Rosen, it seemed to me the question was perfectly all right, but you've been invited to fix it up.
It's been an interesting position. Can I deal with the first objection? We'll have both pages put up on the screen, firstly, as a matter of fairness to the witness.
Yeah.
In relation to the second, in my submission, I'm not conflating anything. I'm drawing the witness's attention to two parts of the document. Firstly, advice that...
You can ask the question, Mr. Rosen. The objection seemed to have been that there were two issues involved in the question.
Yes.
And there are no doubt two issues involved in the question. And you are entitled to ask the question. And now that the pages are both up there, you can perhaps just identify more precisely where on the page the question of risk arises, and indeed the word embarrassment might have been a better word to use than risk, but that's a matter of personal preference.
Commission pleases. Ms Beecham, you now have both pages highlighted in front of you. And just to clarify, on page 1, under the heading background, there is advice that because it wasn't a review developed for government, it doesn't require a formal government response, and I think you've agreed with me that that was a rather technical bit of advice to be providing the Minister, and you said as much, that you wouldn't have used those words yourself. Is that right?
I'm just commenting whether that was the actual paragraph you were referring to when you asked me to respond, whether it was technical or not.
That was the paragraph where I asked you if it was technical, yes?
Yes.
And what do you say to that?
I say that that was clearly, knowing the background to the whole task force report, the intent of Professor Polaires was that implementation of the recommendations contained in the task force report were primarily the responsibility of industry.
And then I asked you some questions about page 2, which you'll see on the right-hand side, what are described as risks for the government, and to pick up Commissioner Pagoni's words, the advice there is that it could be embarrassing for the government to put out a formal response. That's the gist of the advice that's been given on page 2, isn't it, Ms Beecham?
I don't think it talks about embarrassment as such. It states to me the obvious, really, and it's just highlighting that there would be inviting criticism and the like. So it's just, for me, stating facts.
It's true it doesn't say embarrassment, but that's the gist of it, isn't it, Ms Beecham? If we put out a formal response, then we'll invite all these criticisms that we haven't done so in relation to other reports, and it will raise concerns about related matters such as staff ratios, aged care funding and so on. That was the advice?
I agree that this is not absolutely fantastic wording and wording that I would use. I think it's trying to raise issues that I think are quite obvious, but also not wanting to preempt any substantial outcomes of taking some of the strategic action items forward by either and industry and government.
It's not just a matter of infelicitous language, Ms Beecham. I suggest to you that this speaks of a a department that is advising a minister from the point of view of political risk rather than embracing and supporting publicly the work of the task force? What do you say?
So I think it's very clear the government has come out in broad support of the recommendations of the task force.
I don't think you're answering my question, Ms Beecham. The advice is concerned with political risk rather than embracing publicly in a formal way the outcome of the task force that the government itself set up. What do you say?
If I can just say that the department doesn't embrace things publicly when there have been reports made to government. Our role is to support implementation and delivery, and it wasn't our place to embrace it or not. It was really providing, as you said, advice to, this is one piece of advice provided to the minister, along with a range of other advices we provide to the minister.
Ms Beecham, I didn't say anything to you about the department embracing it publicly. I said that the department was advising the government of political risks and potential embarrassment rather than advising the government that it ought to be publicly embracing the outcome of the task force report. What do you say?
On this particular occasion, yes. But if I could just add, we provide a range of advice to the minister. This is one piece of advice.
I see. Is there other advice that's different to this and advises the government to make a formal response to the Polaires report?
We have provided advice, and I've had conversations personally with Minister Wyatt to embrace the recommendations, yes.
Ms Beecham, this is not leadership, is it?
This is one piece of advice in a range of advices that go to ministers.
I suggest to you that this is advice that will just, better if we just keep our heads in the sand rather than being seen to be publicly embracing this report, because there could be political embarrassment associated with us not having done a similar thing in relation to other reports.
I would certainly not like the impression that the department and indeed the Commonwealth hasn't shown leadership in embracing the Polaires report, and that's been confirmed publicly. This is one piece of advice that has gone up by, as you say, a senior officer to Minister Wyatt, but in the context of getting things done and actually delivering against the strategic actions, I think that's probably more important to focus on in terms of representing leadership.
Now, you know, Ms Beecham, that an aged care workforce industry council was established subsequent to the Polaires Task Force report, don't you?
Yes.
And you know that its task is to implement the 14 strategic actions in the Polaires Task Force report.
Yes.
Do you, in the ordinary course, receive the minutes of the Workforce Industry Council's monthly meetings?
I do not personally receive them, no.
Is there an officer in your department who is charged with receiving and evaluating what is in those minutes? Do you know?
Yes,
There is? And who's that?
I think I can recall, and I'll ask Ms Kate Macaulay.
She's an officer who reports to you, is she not, Mr Wan?
She does, yes.
Yeah. And is that right? Is it part of her role to receive the minutes of the Workforce Industry Council meetings?
Her role is as a contact point for the Industry Council. At this stage, there's no requirement or expectation that the minutes of the meetings are provided to us. That's something that we would clarify in the context of an MOU.
My question's not so much whether there's an arrangement for it to happen, but whether it happens. Do you know? Does she get them?
I don't know if she gets them.
Okay. You do know that she has dialed into a couple of the meetings?
Yes.
Now,
Mr. Wan, I wonder whether I might ask you to sit a bit closer to the microphone.
Sorry.
Only because the answer that you gave a moment ago, I thought you said that there was no expectation that the minutes of the meetings be provided to us. The transcript actually has typed up expectation that the ministers' meetings are provided to us.
Oh.
So I think there's a risk that we might miscapture what you're saying.
That's a very important point.
The word should be minutes, shouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Commissioner. I want to ask you about one set of the minutes that have been provided to the Royal Commission, and could I ask, please, that tab 140 of the General Tender Bundle please be displayed on the screen, and in particular page 0019, second page of that document. And just for your understanding, Ms Beecham, this is the meeting of the 15th of August 2019 of the Council. And you'll see that in the left-hand column there's an item 3.1, and then there's a heading matter for decision, funding for the Council. Do you see that? Ms Beecham, is that
Yes,
clear there?
Yes. Sorry, Councillor.
You'll see there's a series of dot points then in the third column. And I want to ask you about the fifth of those. Do you see it starts, there was discussion about whether, it's about halfway down the page, there was discussion about whether to engage with the Minister on the funding issue. And if I just pause there, Mr McCoy's evidence was the funding issue was government funding for the work of the Council. And then returning to the document, a number of directors had already met with the Minister in relation to their specific aged care issues. Feedback from those meetings was that the Minister did not necessarily agree with the commitment on aged care from the previous Minister. I've just paused there in the reading. Is that difference of views between the current Minister and his predecessor something that you're familiar with as the Secretary of the Department?
I don't think I'm in a position to respond to what conversations may or may not happen between ministers.
Well, I'm not asking you anything about conversations with ministers. I'm asking you whether you as Secretary to each of these ministers consecutively is aware that they have a different view, apparently, about commitments on aged care that were made by Minister White. Minister Colbeck takes a different view. Is that something you're aware of?
It's not something I'm aware of.
Returning to the document, it says the Minister, and this is Minister Colbeck now, was aware of the Council but thought it had started in January 2019 and had not done much. This misinformation was apparently supplied by the Department. Do you see that is stated in the minutes?
I can see that.
Does it concern you that the Council, which is established to give effect to the actions in the Polaires report, which itself was set up by the federal government, is apparently of the view that misinformation is being provided by the department to the Minister?
I think the words say this misinformation was apparently supplied by the department.
Yes.
And I am not in a position to say what that's referring to.
No, and I'm not asking you to say what it's referring to. I'm asking you whether you're concerned that that's recorded in the minutes of this Council.
Yes, I am concerned.
I should say for completeness that when I asked Mr McCoy about that on Monday, he said that that accurately reflected the view of the Council that there was apparent misinformation being provided by the department to the Minister. That equally would concern you.
That would very much concern me if we're providing misinformation to the Minister, yes.
Can I go back to you on this topic, Mr Wan? Why hasn't an officer of the department attended in person any of the meetings of this Workforce Industry Council, which has now met 6 times, as we understand it?
An offer has been made to attend in person.
What do you mean by that? That the department has offered to have someone attend the meetings?
The more recent meetings, yes.
The minutes record that the department has declined to attend at least one meeting. Is that not right?
I'm not aware of that invitation.
Have you spoken?
Could I see the relevant bit?
Sure. Excuse me, mate. If I could ask that tab 140 please be put up on the screen. And just for your understanding, this is the same meeting, 15th of August, page .0023. You see the bottom entry there, 4.6.2, Department of Health, First Assistant Secretaries Charles Wan and Jay Smith, and then the minutes record the departmental representative declined the invitation to attend the council meeting. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you say that's not accurate, that there was no declining by the department to attend a council meeting?
That's my understanding.
I see. So your evidence is that what you've personally offered, have you, to attend a meeting and they haven't let you come? Is that what you're telling us?
No.
What is your evidence?
That's for the September and October meetings, as far as I'm aware, that Kate McCauley was invited to attend, and she offered on one occasion to attend personally, and they said that's not necessary.
I see. But she's attended both of those meetings by telephone.
Yes. For parts of the meeting.
Mr. Wan, this council is doing a very important job, isn't it, of trying to implement the 14 strategic actions in the Players report?
Very much so.
This is the principal bit of work that is going on in Australia to address the range of issues that arise in the context of the aged care workforce.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's work that was initiated by the government when it set up the Players Task Force.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You see, I can't for the life of me understand why the department wouldn't be doing everything it can to support the work of this council. Do you think the department is doing everything it can to support the work of this council?
Yes. We can do more.
Well, you can't be doing everything you can and be able to do more, can you, Mr. Wan?
Well, every project goes through phases, and the council at present needs to do its work in terms of establishing, to work out, just thinking in terms of establishing a implementation plan, engagement strategy, communication strategy, scheduling, prioritising, and that's work that they have been, as I understand, intensely involved in, and they are coming to a position where they're ready to engage with the department to work out in a more comprehensive way how we can work in partnership going forward and be very clear about their roles, our roles, the role of industry, the role of the Department of Employment, for example, basically the various players. And I think we're getting pretty close to that. And I met with the Secretariat recently and asked for a meeting in early November so that we could consider their plans and what they saw were the priorities and the roles of stakeholders going forward, including us, and we'd work out going forward through an MOU how we would operate going forward in that context, because it's an enormous piece of work spanning a number of years, and we have to get the early parts right.
Mr McCoy, who's the chairman of the council, has provided a statement to the Royal Commission, and he is responding, and I'd ask that this be brought up. Mr McCoy's statement is Exhibit 11.4, and I'm looking at page 10 of that document. Paragraph 65 towards the bottom of the page. Do you see that, Mr Wan?
Yes.
Question, how is the council funded? He said the government's funding commitment to the council of $2.6 million, see the budget announcement at attachment 8, is yet to result in a direct funding agreement other than as explained at paragraph 70 below. And at paragraph 70 on the following page, Mr McCoy said the council secretariat function is currently funded by the Department of Health until 30 June. I won't read the bit in the brackets. I understand this forms part of the government's funding commitment as mentioned in paragraph 65 above. And he also said at paragraph 68 at the top of that page, otherwise the council is acting with no funding and other than as set out above, and it does not have any insight into when funding is expected. The government will need government funding, the council will need government funding support, particularly in the early years, to drive the changes recommended in the task force report with the speed required by the sector. I'll just pause there in the reading. The Police Task Force report timeframe is that these strategic actions will be implemented within 1 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. You're aware of that?
Yes.
And I suggest to you that's entirely consistent with the urgency of these issues that are also being examined by the Royal Commission. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So it's concerning, I suggest, that Mr McCoy is informing the Royal Commission that the council, which is the body set up to implement these functions, is well into its life, I suggest to you, some 6 months in the existence of this council, acting with no funding. What do you say to that?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Yep. My question is, it's concerning, is it not, that Mr McCoy is telling the Royal Commission that his council is operating with no funding?
I agree, that's concerning, he's saying that.
What's the government doing about that, Mr Wan?
Just by way of context, if I may, in terms of funding arrangements for the body, I think it was made clear, and the council accepts that some money has been put aside for the implementation of the strategy. In an early discussion that I had with the former interim chair, when I called him to introduce myself, and part of that discussion went to funding. At that discussion, I made it clear that what was currently available for funding for the Commission had been identified in the 1920 budget. It was part of that funding. There's other bits of funding, but relevantly here, the 2.6 million for that implementation. I indicated at that time that components of that would go to, for 1920, would go to secretariat support, the development of online training modules, and the development of an evaluation strategy framework. That going forward, as part of normal government processes, once the council has had time to think through what it needed to do, and there were areas where they thought additional funding was required, then they should come back to us, and we would work with them to develop proposals which could be considered and put to government.
Do I understand that to mean that the ball's in their court as far as indicating to the government what funding they need and for what purpose? In their court, in terms of how this works out, will inevitably be in a partnership context, but they've been tasked with taking the lead in implementation. We are a very important part of that, but they, and part of the requirements in any case of the work orders, was that they produce an implementation plan. And in the evidence that I've seen, they've actually done a pretty good job at that, and I presume that's something that will come to me to have a look at, and we will meet and work through and identify with them where they think they need additional funding. If I can go to a different topic and address a question back to you, Ms Beecham. In your statement, your most recent statement to us, you're asked to provide information about the structure of the aged care division of the Department of Health.
I was asked to comment on not just one division, but a number of divisions in relation to the delivery of aged care.
Okay, I'll be more specific. If we can go to page 2 of your statement, you're asked 2 questions which appear helpfully in the grey shaded box at the top of the page about the effect of the structural changes that have occurred in recent years with the move of the aged care function of the federal government from the Department of Health to the Department of Social Services in 2013.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were also asked about the effect of the administrative arrangements when the function moved back to the Department of Health in 2015.
That's correct.
That's right. And you've helpfully provided us with some numbers about the full-time equivalent numbers of employees of the department performing functions in relation to the aged care portfolio in those various moves. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. I'll ask you a general question first and then we'll go to the detail if we need to. But was the net effect of those changes, that is the function going from the Department of Health to the Department of Social Services in 2013 and then coming back initially in a large group of employees in 2015 and then some further employees involved in my aged care IT functions more recently in 2018 and 2019, is the effect of that there was a significant reduction in the number of full-time employees doing aged care work for the Commonwealth?
To answer that generally, I don't think it's certainly a reduction, but whether it's a significant reduction, I probably would contest that because when we do look at the toing and froing of functions, when there's changes in machinery of government, some of the functions that return back to the department, there were still aged care functions that remained within the Department of Social Services.
Yes.
So in terms of a net effect, I probably wouldn't say significant.
Okay. Our calculations here, I'll be clear to you, are that 1,270 full-time equivalent employees went across in 2013. That is, went from the Department of Social Security to the Department of Health. Sorry, went from the Department of Health to the Department of Social Services in 2013. And then when one takes into account the various numbers you've informed the Commission about that came back between 2015 and 2019, that there was a loss of 262 full-time equivalent employees, or approximately 20%. Do you take issue with those numbers, Ms Beecham?
I do on the face of it, yes.
Okay. In fairness to you, I should give you the opportunity, or rather give the Commonwealth the opportunity to make a more detailed response to that if you would like to. That's an invitation that's open to you if you're not in a position to deal now specifically with the numbers.
I could go through my statement where I've gone through some of the details and the movements of staff, but if you want more detailed information than I've provided, I'm happy to take that away and come back with that.
I think that would be preferable if I could ask you to do that.
Yes, what might help, Ms Beecham, for our purposes is start with the aggregate number that Council just referred to, 1270, and then take off the movements of staff who went to other bodies, so it's clearly documented in the table. Thank you.
Commissioner, is that the way it's been presented? Because I have gone through in some detail of where the numbers have gone in transfers, and including footnotes, I agree, but perhaps it could be represented differently. Is that what you're
Yes,
asking for?
I think a table showing those movements directly would be very helpful, and then we can all agree where we stand.
Okay.
Thank you.
I should indicate for completeness, Ms Beecham, I've not taken into account in those numbers the significant movement of staff that went from the Department of Health to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission in 2019. So that's obviously a separate reduction. But I should indicate to you as a matter of fairness that on our assessment of your figures, it looks to be a significant reduction in the region of 20% that has occurred over that period of time. And I know you're going to respond to that, but you've agreed that there has been a reduction.
Yes, I agree
right?
there's been a reduction, yes.
And that reduction has occurred at a time when the sector itself has been growing considerably, hasn't it?
The sector has been growing, yes.
Yeah. And putting aside my characterisation of the reduction as substantial or otherwise, we can just ignore that for the moment. A reduction in the number of Commonwealth employees involved in policy, operational and regulatory functions at a time when the sector is growing necessarily means that the Commonwealth's ability to carry out those functions has been reduced during that period. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
And why is that?
I think this is only looking at one area in terms of full-time equivalents. In terms of resourcing the functions that we undertake, we do that through a couple of means. One's through staffing, one's through contractors, one's through the use of consultants to give us that flexibility, and indeed commissioning other parts of the department to assist with certain things like data analytics, research and the like. So I think that's certainly, on the face of it, I would not say there's been a diminution of departmental effort going into our aged care functions.
In your statement, you indicate to the Commission in relation to a few policy areas that consultants have been engaged to provide advice to the department in relation, for example, to the Serious Incident Response Scheme, and Mr Wan details the engagement of Alpha Beta in relation to the census. Is that an indication of an increase in spending on consultancies during the period that I've been asking you about?
I can't recall the exact number in terms of the expenditure on consultancies, but the use of consultancies is not uncommon.
Yes.
And, for example, the Professor Eager, we did ask her to do a piece of consultancy work over an 18-month period.
Yes.
And I think it's drawing on the expertise of people like her and other clinicians that help supplement our workforce.
And I should say, in fairness to Ms Beecham, that Professor Eager's work has been very useful for the Royal Commission, of course. Now, can I change to another topic, which is the serious incident response scheme that you refer to in your statement, Ms Beecham, at page 19. That could be shown on the screen. And a little bit of context for this. This was in the context of the Commission asking you about whether or not there should be a registration or conduct scheme for the aged care workforce. You understand that that's the topic we're interested in?
Yes.
Yes. We've had evidence both from you back in February and more recently from Ms Laffin about the development of the serious incident response scheme, and I don't want to go into that in detail again here. But I do want to ask you about some of the evidence that we have heard in the Commission since you gave evidence in February, and particularly want to ask you about evidence that was given by Mr Peter O'Brien, an officer of the Department in the Brisbane hearings on the 6th and 7th of August. Are you familiar with the evidence that Mr O'Brien gave about the Department's processes for responding to mandatory reports that are made by approved providers?
Yes, I am.
Mr O'Brien gave evidence that he was the manager and team leader of the compulsory reporting part of the department, and his evidence was that he did that work from his office in Tasmania. The question is it part of, from your perspective as the head of the department, is it part of that role to investigate reported incidents? That is, incidents that are reported to the department as required under Section 63 of the Aged Care Act. For example, that there's been an allegation of a resident being assaulted by a staff member. Is it part of his function, as far as you're concerned, to investigate such reports?
I would couch as part of his function is to provide an initial assessment, whether it does warrant further investigation or not.
His evidence, and I hope I'm characterising it fairly, his evidence was that the department had a limited ability within the systems that he oversaw to be able to cross-match where a report came in about a particular employee in circumstances where there'd been an earlier report about that employee engaging in misconduct. Do you understand what I'm asking you?
Yes, I do.
We heard evidence just before this panel from Mr Brown of the Queensland Health Ombudsman, who was asked essentially that question, whether his office had the ability to track such information, and his evidence was that that information was easily accessible to his staff. Now, Mr O'Brien's evidence, on the other hand, was that that information was not easily accessible and relied on an officer being able to recall that a name had been the subject of an earlier report. Do you understand that was the evidence that he gave?
I do understand that, and I think there was further follow-up in terms of what's been done to ensure that those names of both aggressors and victims are highlighted within our systems now.
So do you say that the position now is that, as is the case in the Queensland Health Ombudsman, that information is easily accessible?
That information is accessible from here on in.
I can just ask a follow-up question about that. Does the current reporting form require a provider to inform the department if the worker that is the subject of that report has previously been a subject of a report?
Sorry, can you ask that again? Sorry.
That's all right. When an approved provider puts in a report and says that this is an allegation of an assault by employee A at our facility, is there a provision on the reporting form that requires the provider to tell the department if they've previously made a report concerning employee A?
I'm not sure exactly what's on the form. I'd have to get advice on that.
Okay, I'd ask you to do that, please, and through the Commonwealth's lawyers inform us of that if you could. Going back to the Serious Incident Response Scheme, what, as you understand it, is the relationship between the proposed scheme and the registration of personal care attendants?
The Serious Incident Response Scheme, and I think we've had much work done on it, is about ensuring that we have good information on who is affected by reportable assaults and other requirements. I think in terms of going forward, the relationship between the Serious Incident Response Scheme and the idea of a screening or registration scheme are certainly related. The form of that screening register or registration scheme will provide us with an extra avenue to ensure that we have the ability to track workers through the aged care system.
The initial recommendation to set up a Serious Incident Response Scheme was made by the Australian Law Reform Commission back in its elder abuse report in June 2017. Is that right?
Yes.
And it's now October 2019. And as I read your statement, you can't inform the Royal Commission of a date by which such a scheme is likely to be in place. Am I reading your evidence correctly?
That's correct. I think we're looking at, and I think it's been said publicly, that we're looking to have something in place over the next 12 months, assuming that we can get legislation through Parliament and a range of other things done.
Professor Patterson, who was one of the co-authors of the Carnell-Patterson report in October 2017 that emphasised the need for such a scheme in a recommendation in that report, his evidence in Brisbane, and I quote, was the delay in implementing this recommendation is hard to understand and means that there continues to be inadequate protection of the welfare of aged care recipients. He's right, isn't there? The existing regulatory regime inadequately protects the welfare of aged care recipients, partly because of the gaps between the various state schemes that we heard evidence about earlier today.
If you're specifically talking about workforce issues in terms of protecting residents, indeed the introduction of a screening register and a registration scheme, whatever form that might take, would assist.
There doesn't seem to be any urgency on the part of the government, Ms Beecham, in relation to this matter. What do you say to that?
I think we're working as hard as we possibly can to look at what occurs in other jurisdictions, other countries, and making sure that we're well aligned with other workforces that do provide support for our most vulnerable. For example, I have been talking to Graham Head, who's the regulator for the NDIA, and looking at, well, what has he put in place? And he's working on a scheme which he's hoping to have operational in July 2020. So I don't think we're too far behind in looking at a scheme that might be well aligned with other social service regulatory arrangements and is consistent across the Commonwealth. And indeed, as you've pointed out, Mr Rosen, getting states and territories and working through the complexity of what will be required in the development of such a scheme, whether it can go from screening, codes of conduct, a full registration scheme, will require a lot of effort across jurisdictions, a lot of effort across the Commonwealth, and indeed making sure that we've got the systems and support and a sector who can also operationalise it. So I think, to answer your question bluntly, is I think we're going as fast as we possibly can and aligning ourselves with what else is happening.
And in fairness to you, Ms Beecham, you do in your statement set out a number of steps that have been taken by the department and the government more generally in consulting about the establishment of such a scheme.
Yes.
Yes. Now, can I turn to the question of staffing numbers in residential aged care facilities, which has been the subject of a good deal of evidence this week. I'd ask you to, well, I withdraw that. Do you accept, Ms Beecham, that there is a link between poor staffing levels and substandard care in residential aged care facilities?
I think there's a link between numbers and quality of staff.
Numbers and quality of staff?
Yes.
What about numbers and quality of care?
Quality of care
Yes.
is, in terms of the workforce, to support quality care outcomes, I think it's critical.
Yes. So if I'm understanding it correctly, there's a link between numbers, quality of staff, and because quality of staff is relevant to quality of care, there's a link between all three.
Yes.
Yeah. As you'll be well aware, we have a statutory requirement in Section 54 of the Aged Care Act that approved providers, I'm paraphrasing, have a sufficient number of staff to address the care needs of residents. Agree with that?
Correct, yes.
Yep. And we also have standards that sit under the Act which make similar provision. As against that, we've got the evidence this week from Professor Eager from the University of Wollongong, who you referred to earlier, who's informed the Commission that more than half of residential aged care facilities in Australia, in her opinion, are understaffed by comparison with relevant international benchmarks, and she specifically refers us to the United States. Are you aware that that's the evidence that she has given to the Commission this week?
I'm aware of that evidence, yes.
How do you respond to that evidence, Ms Beecham?
On the face of it, absolutely very disappointed, but I think we need to look at what actually sits behind it. There's a great deal of respect in the department for Professor Eager, and she's done and has drawn on specific work that we've also done in the department using Professor Eager, and I would absolutely like to better understand the rating system and how she's drawn on that evidence and how that can be mapped in the Australian context, because there are a number of different variables and quality indicators that are different between Australia and the United States. But she's had a look at all of that, but I'd really like to better understand some of the assumptions and how that would map to the Australian context, so much so that as we look at a case mix model in Australia and trialling that over the next little while with 10,000 care recipients, I'd like to actually see if we can apply the methodology in actually using it in the Australian system.
When you made the reference to the trial of the 10,000, it's 10,000 residents, isn't it? That's the trial of the ANAC replacement of ACFI, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, this is Professor Eager's new case mix funding model. Where's it being trialled?
So if I can just give a bit of context, and also very impressed with the acronyms, but I think when looking at the work that Professor Eager has done for us over the past 18 months, has looked at a case mix model which might support better funding and support arrangements based on actual needs of care of our care recipients in residential aged care facilities. So there's been a lot of work to look at a case mix model. What we're in the process now of doing, and hasn't yet been put to government to actually implement, is trialling that work that Professor Eager has done through the Australian National Classification System. So using that case mix model. The 10,000 that you refer to, we've just about to start the trial, which will run until April. And how we've selected those 10,000, we went out seeking expressions of interest from providers and care recipients, and I think we had 60,000 applications. And so there's certainly a desire to look at this model, which may better reflect the requirements around support for our residents in aged care facilities. So we're working through now exactly where those 10,000 residents will be. And of course, from my point of view, I do want to see a mix of metro, rural, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander residential facilities, some of the multi-purpose services, the range of services that we have got, and see its applicability.
And what's the timing of this model?
Sorry, Commissioner?
What's the timing of your work?
The timing is we're just about to embark on the trial, which will go to April next year.
So when might details become accessible potentially to us?
On the trial, probably within the next week or so.
That's about the commencement of the trial.
Yes.
I think Commissioner Picconi's question might be more about the outcome of the trial beyond April.
Oh, well, we would have to do that work, obviously, to find out what the outcomes were, but working in this instance with Professor Eager's team, not her herself, in terms of helping us with the trial. But there's a lot of work to do in terms of seeing whether the application of this case mix model is going to work. And even getting advice up to government is going to take some time as well before it's introduced.
It would seem to be some work that would be of potentially enormous significance to what we're doing. It would be a great pity if it were not available to us.
Happy to make any information available to the Commission, as we have been, and indeed if any of your officers want to be involved in looking at how this might work, because it does get down to the care needs of people in residential aged care facilities and what's required in terms of staffing mixes and support to meet their needs.
And did I understand your answer earlier on to Mr. Rosen's questions about the report of Professor Eager's recently, that you are in fact going to look at what her modelling and the assumption that she has made, or merely that you would like to look at it?
I would like people in my organisation, both on the clinical side and in the aged care side, to better understand what sits behind it.
Yeah, no, they're the words you use, that you would like, which is a bit like the expression of a wish. Is the wish going to be translated into directions to somebody to look at it and model it and understand it? And if so, what's the timing of that?
The work was actually commissioned by the Royal Commission.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to seek permission for us to work closely with Professor Eager in better understanding and mapping that work to the Australian context, yes.
I see.
Might I ask a follow-up question? Are you looking more broadly at the extension of the sorts of work that Professor Eager's organisation has been doing to the home care sector? And I'm not sure, but I don't think it covers allied health, but I could be wrong, Ms. Beecham.
The case mix model specifically is being designed for residential, but in parallel to that, we're also looking at how do we differentiate and publicise performance standards in both home care and residential care.
Thank you.
You may have partly answered this, and you can refer me to your earlier answer if you have, but my question is there a place for a star rating along the lines of Professor Eager's proposal? Is there a place for that in Australia, Ms. Beecham?
I think there is a place for a star rating system on the performance of aged care services, and I think it needs to incorporate not just staffing, but a range of other factors.
There are 4 domains that are three are included in the US star rating system.
Yes.
Staffing, regulatory performance and quality of care, yes. Professor Eager's suggestion was that added to that should be resident experience.
And allied health.
And allied health she also referred to. Sitting there now, are there matters that go beyond that you think ought to be part of any Australian star rating system?
I think it's really mapping to the Australian system and making sure that we pick up, as you have said, customer experience, and not just looking at the numbers, but what sits behind the numbers in how services are being delivered.
Going back to my questions about existing staffing levels in aged care facilities, if Professor Eager's right, that would suggest that there's a very high level of non-compliance with the legal requirement to have adequate staffing levels. Do you agree with that?
I don't think I could directly make that correlation based on the work that Professor Eager's done.
Why shouldn't there be publicly available information about staffing levels at particular residential aged care homes?
I think that's something we're looking at and which I have referred to previously. And indeed, the more transparency as a principle around the system, I think the better off we all are as consumers.
One final question, and it also relates to staffing numbers and workforce planning. I'm sure you're very well aware of the various reports which indicate the need for a very significant increase in the overall aged care workforce in the next 20 or 30 years to correspond to the boom in numbers, expected boom in numbers of Australians who will be entering the residential aged care sector and also needing home care. Are you confident that we have in place the workforce planning mechanisms and settings to ensure that we're going to be able to achieve that significant increase in numbers?
I think we need more information in terms of workforce planning, and I think we need to do, as a Commonwealth, across all of those other agencies I mentioned earlier, a much better effort around workforce planning, particularly if we're looking at getting 1 million workers, I think I've said previously in my statement, by 2050. And I think that is a challenge for us all in attracting and retaining good quality staff to the industry.
Commissioners, they're the questions that I have of Ms Beecham and Mr Wan.
Thank you.
I just have one question. I'll check with Mr Rosen first.
Sure.
Do you want to do it with the microphone?
Thank you. Mr Wan, you referred, when you were talking about the council's work, that in the evidence you have seen the development of that work from their perspective. Do you recall giving that evidence?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
If I could just have 2 documents brought up on the screen. Tab 48 from the General Tender Bundle. You'll see that is the, for the Commission's understanding, this is a document attached to the statement of Mr McCoy, who gave evidence for the Council. And this is, if we could go to the second page, this is discussion paper 3, and you'll see there it says it's the approach to implementation. Is that the implementation plan you referred to?
Yes, and it's accompanied by other documents. Yeah.
And if I could go to tab 47, please, operator. And the next page, just to see the title, please. And that says engagement plan. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the first time you had seen those documents was in the evidence preparing for today, is that right?
Yes.
And is it your understanding the department hasn't yet been provided with those documents that have been tendered by the
Yes.
Commission? No further questions.
Yes, thank you. I just want to ask one question, or at least a topic, that goes back to that ministerial information request, I'm afraid, which if it can be brought back up, that would be good. If not, I'll just rely upon...
Tab 226, Commissioner,
right.
or Operator, rather.
And on the second page of that document, you'll recall that you were asked questions about the bit that's really the beginning of the fourth line, so the release of a formal response to the strategy, and then Mr. Rosen asked you questions about what then followed, which talks about would carry several risks for government, and then he went through some of the dot points. The end result seems to be that there is not what might have been understood by the author of that as a formal response to the strategy. Now, if there is a formal response to the strategy, or if what we've got is the response to the strategy, then please say so. But if there isn't a formal response to the strategy, then it would seem to me that it would be very useful to our work on the Commission to have a formal response to the strategy, because to some extent what we are doing overlaps the work of the strategy, and it would, I must say, be very good to know what the Commission, what the government's response to the strategy is, so that we could take that on board ourselves and think about what it is that we should do that might be different. So can I ask you whether there is likely to be a formal response, whether there has been a formal response, or whether we just need to sit and wait?
Could I say, in terms of responding, and I think I mentioned previously, there have already been a number of actions and deliverables, and so in providing the government's response in a more formal way, written, I can certainly do that and provide that to the Commission.
Well,
but I was just wondering if I can also add what's actually been done against each of the strategic actions.
I know that you said earlier on that there had been a number of things that had been done and that there had been a number of, as it were, responses. Yes. That's why I began this by saying that which the author thought of as a formal response may not have happened. But should I assume that all of the things that you've referred to, the responses thus far, and the actions which you said speak louder than words, that they are to be regarded as the sum total of the response and that there is to be nothing further?
From the government's point of view, the Minister has said that they've, on behalf of government, they broadly accept the recommendations, the findings. So that's in a sense, a formal response. And he said to me, the previous Minister, just get on and do it and get on with actually working on the action items.
If there's any more detailed response that the government thinks might be useful, it would be of help to us.
I'm absolutely happy to provide a very detailed response to what we're doing against each of the action items.
I think you might regard that as snap. We will happily receive it.
Thank you.
Might I add to that? Clearly, there's another document that's been prepared, which is a work plan, and I think we'd like to know the government's response to that work plan. But in addition to that, we heard evidence yesterday in a panel of CEOs where they were saying that in order to do this work, they need a strong partnership with government because it's the main main funder, main regulator and so on, main everything else really, except provider of care services. They also said that they thought there was a need for CEO in their organisation to actually drive this reform, and that goes beyond the support that's been given by, is it Miles
Morgan?
Morgan? That's right. And I think we'd absolutely like to hear the government's views on the suggestions that were made yesterday in that CEO's discussion, if that's possible, please.
Now?
No, I'm happy. No, in the response you're going to do. I wouldn't want to do that to you now. That'd be a bit unfair.
Thanks, Commissioner.
But
Certainly, I'd take that.
I mean, obviously, what we don't want to write out an impossible utopia as the recommendations. And one way or another, we are asked by the Commonwealth, or at least the Governor-General in right of the Commonwealth, or the Crown, to embark upon this inquiry, and the Commonwealth is an intimate player, if not the overwhelming intimate player in the exercise. So that degree of detail that you can give us on these issues will be not only of benefit to the entire Australian community, but practically speaking, of benefit to those who must implement it on behalf of the Commonwealth.
Can I make a comment, Commissioner?
Yes, please.
And thank you. There's no doubt about the work that's going on and the leadership that's being shown both by industry, the Commonwealth and a number of other parties involved. And I don't want to leave the impression that nothing's been done because there hasn't been a formal written response. I really want to reiterate that, and I'll get the details to you, that whilst even Professor Pelaez has pointed to a few of the recommendations that are responsibility for government, I would contend that there are many more recommendations where the Commonwealth's actively involved now. So I'd like to be able to put that to you. And I just wanted to say, perhaps we haven't communicated well publicly about what's actually going on, and I'll take that on board as well.
Well, I'm pleased that you've said that, and I'm sure that that's a good message that needs to be stated. I think, though, the reality is that there is an impression that there has not been a response. And speaking for me, at the moment, that's the impression that I partly have. So I would be delighted to be disabused of that impression and delighted by the offer that you will do so.
If I might say, Ms Beecham, part of the challenge, and I know you appreciate this, is that you're moving to do things at the same time we're considering things more generally. So we know you're looking at combining assessment processes. We know you're looking at combining the arrangements around home care, the two different layers. It's quite challenging for a Royal Commission to find a steady state here. So anything that takes up your earlier offer that you made when Commissioner Tracy and I were in the chair, to provide regular updates on those kinds of developments will help our work enormously, if that were possible, please.
I would be delighted, and if I can I make another comment?
Yes.
Because there's been a number of remarks about not just the leadership that councils point out, about the department and the government and a range of other portfolios, but we have, and comments about tardiness and delays and things, and yet you're saying there's so much going on, it's hard to keep up. That's what it also feels like from us. There is a lot going on. I've got an absolutely wonderfully dedicated workforce and committed workforce. The reform agenda has been quite ambitious, and the Prime Minister has said, do not stop while the Royal Commission's going on. Absolutely happy to provide, in whatever form the Commissioners would like, a regular update.
I accept that, and I fully appreciate that the work that's required to provide information to this Royal Commission is quite substantial as well.
Before Ms Beecham and Mr Wan are excused, could I just place on record as a matter of fairness, and I'm indebted to my learned friend Ms Morgan for reminding me of this, there is an annexure to Mr Wan's statement Perhaps if page 0029 could just be briefly brought up on the screen. It's Annexure A, although I think I'm right in saying it's the only annexure. Yes, Annexure A, and it does quite helpfully set out in relation to each of the 14 strategic actions some information about the Commonwealth's activities in relation to them. I dare not use the phrase formal response again, but it does provide information in relation to each of the
If
actions.
that's to be regarded then as the formal response, then it'll be a short document to reproduce and give as the formal response. If, however, and then it fixes it.
Yes.
If it's only a bit of a wider thing, then we can get something that incorporates it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, thanks.
We'll do the latter.
Oh, so I was nodding.
We just wanted to make clear that we hadn't been asked to do it, and Mr. Wan had gone through this very, very difficult process to identify all the recommendations and what was being done as of the date of his statement, and we will prepare a more thorough version of that application.
Yes, and we were very aware of that. I mean, even at the beginning of the discussion with Mr. Wan, we corrected typos, so I think we're there.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We're to excuse the witnesses, are we?
I'm quite content with that.
All right.
Commissioner, yes.
Thank you both for coming. I've already said how important our understanding of the Commonwealth position is, and in large part because really the work that we do is going to have an enormous impact on the Commonwealth, or at least ideally will have an enormous impact on the Commonwealth. And there's a need for us to try and create something which is that can be picked up, implemented and used, so that we are grateful for your comments, and thank you. Otherwise, excuse further attendance. 2 o'clock.
Thank you.
All stand. The Royal Commission is now adjourned. Please be seated.
Commissioners, your first term of reference requires you to inquire into the quality of aged care services in Australia, the extent to which those services meet the needs of older Australians, the extent of substandard care being provided, including mistreatment and all forms of abuse, the causes of any systemic failures and any actions that should be taken in response. The evidence this Commission has heard since it commenced establishes a clear link between the numbers and quality of aged care workers and the quality and safety of aged care services. That evidence demonstrates that the aged care sector is struggling to attract, train and retain its workforce. Aged care recipients must receive quality care and must be protected from harm. Their well-being must be ensured. Their quality of life supported. Older Australians deserve respect and dignity. The aged care workforce is critical to ensuring that these basic rights are met. The workforce is too small. The bare minimum has become the norm. It is unsustainable. Further, the current workforce does not have the right skills mix. The evidence suggests skills deficits across the sector, exacerbated by time-poor staff and threadbare rostering practices. Inadequate education and training has limited workforce capability to deliver quality clinical care. On current trends, the entire system is under serious threat. Without fundamental change, we are concerned the system will fail. Nurses and personal care workers, doctors, allied health professionals and allied health assistants must work in integrated care teams to ensure that those receiving aged care are looked after and do not come to harm. Together, they must ensure that people are well cared for and their quality of life and their well-being is supported and enhanced. An integrated care team which is skilled, knowledgeable, educated and trained in age-related conditions and illnesses is necessary for the provision of both quality and safe care. Integrated care teams must be diligently supported by rigorous governance structures and effective leadership by industry and government. There's a debate about whether aged care is primarily about clinical care or whether it is about delivering holistic care in a home-like environment. The issue is fundamental to aged care reform. It's also fundamental to the type of aged care workforce we need now and into the future. Professor John Polaires and Professor Cathy Eager highlighted this issue in their evidence this week. Professor Eager said that aged care residents have a right and it is possible to provide both an environmentally friendly place for people to receive care, socially engaged and clinically competent care at the same time. She pointed to compelling evidence that shows the majority of residents are very frail and have significant care needs. Professor Eager proposed a focus on clinical care in response to those needs. She said, and I quote, "When people describe residential aged care as a person's home, it is somehow implying that it's a lifestyle choice, rather than people are going into residential aged care now because they're so frail or have other significant care needs that they can no longer be at home. The population currently in care needs more clinical skills, not less," she told us. Professor Polaires was critical of a few aspects of Professor Eager's report. He said in part that the report is premised around a clinically based, institutionalised government approach to delivering aged care services. He contends the need is for the workforce to be able to respond to clinical care needs, but also to deliver a holistic care model. He described the 5 elements of a care plan as clinical needs, functional health needs, cognitive health needs, cultural and linguistic needs, and living well aspirations. We submit that the evidence about the level of frailty or those currently in residential aged care facilities is powerful and should be acknowledged in system design. However, aged care must deliver both quality of life and quality clinical care. The two are not mutually exclusive. Unfortunately, the current system appears to be failing on both fronts. We know from the evidence this week and in earlier hearings that in order to provide quality and safe care, we need more staff in residential aged care facilities and a better mix of staff. The decline in the employment of nurses in aged care must be addressed and reversed. In both residential and home care, staff must be allowed the time to engage with those they care for and to undertake their duties properly and compassionately. This will help to ensure that high quality and safe care is delivered. In Professor Eager's judgment, 58% of all Australian aged care residents receive unacceptable care hours. For all residents to receive at least 3-star care hours, there would have to be a 37% increase in total care staffing in those facilities currently rated at either 1 or 2 stars on her analysis. That would equate to an overall increase of 20% in total care staffing across Australia. This shortage of staff must be addressed. More staff will go some way to improving the quality and safety of care. It will also improve the safety of workers, ensuring that workers are able to work in a safe environment. In turn, this should improve attraction and retention of staff. As Ms Peake's evidence indicated, workers are more likely to want to stay in safe and supportive workplaces where they are able to perform their work to a high standard and where they feel valued. You heard evidence this week about some options to improve staffing numbers. You heard about methods for calculating staff numbers and staff mix. In particular, you heard about work undertaken by Flinders University on behalf of the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation and work by the University of Wollongong conducted for this Royal Commission. You've heard calls for mandatory minimum staffing levels and a need for greater transparency around staffing numbers. This could include publication of staffing numbers or a star rating type system as proposed by Professor Eager. There may be other options. However, one thing is clear: the status quo is unacceptable. We submit that there's a strong argument for introducing a methodology to determine appropriate staffing numbers and mix of skills, and for any methodology to be transparent. The models explained at this hearing are sophisticated and cannot be fairly described as blunt instruments. Most organisations currently use some method to determine the number of staff they require. As Mr Gilbert of the ANMF said, the current approach used by some employers of relying on aged care industry data to benchmark staffing numbers could not be more blunt. That approach might be regarded as a race to the bottom. We also heard about the importance of enforcing existing standards around the workforce. In the context of the Menarok case study, it became apparent that aged care standards and the current assessment processes may not be adequate to ensure that residential aged care facilities are staffed appropriately. Ms Anne Wunsch contended that the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission provides aged care providers with sufficient guidance on how to meet accreditation standards relating to human resources. However, she stated that it does not provide its own assessors with guidance in relation to a range of care staff to resident ratios that might be considered an appropriate range to provide adequate care. The Commission also does not provide guidance to assessors about the nurse hours per day that might be regarded as reasonable to provide care. On the evidence before you, such guidance is clearly available to be provided. It should be. Commissioners, it is reasonable to conclude that change is required to ensure compliance with the requirement in Section 54 of the Aged Care Act that approved providers maintain an adequate number of appropriately skilled staff to ensure that the care needs of recipients are met. As we heard from Mr Bonner, there is no clear standard or benchmark against which compliance with this provision can be measured. There's no objective measure of whether or not the staffing numbers and mix are appropriate for the needs of the care recipient. This uncertainty serves no one's interests. Not the regulator, not providers, not workers, and certainly not the residents and their families. In addition to having the right numbers of workers, we need to do more to ensure that we have the right type of workers in aged care. Carers must have empathy for those they look after. The Japara case study we examined yesterday demonstrates that this is not always the case. Structural reform is needed, perhaps by way of a registration scheme, to exclude unsuitable workers. This morning you heard from a panel of witnesses about gaps in the current arrangements to oversee unregistered personal care workers. This included that the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission does not have powers in relation to those workers, and there are a number of differences between the oversight provided by states and territories. Ms Reid of the Commission said, and I quote, "As a national body, it does make it difficult to understand the different laws that are around the country to be able to think about referring," unquote. This evidence of a fragmented system is troubling. Perhaps it's a reason why, on Ms Reid's assessment, the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission was conservative in its referring practices. Ms Reid's personal view was that it would be an improvement to have some sort of carer register, a national register. The issue of staffing numbers and mix is a complex one that is inextricably linked with the funding of the aged care system. Funding is an issue that we will consider in detail as the work of the Royal Commission continues into 2020. The vocational educational training, or VET sector, is a crucial part of workforce reform and is itself in transition following the 2019 Joyce Review, Strengthening Skills. We're not confident that the reforms outlined in the Joyce Review will bring about necessary reform in the immediate term. Much will depend on how quickly the Council of Australian Governments embraces and accelerates action on the recommendations. Mr Bonner described the Joyce Review as another example of, quote, rearranging the deck chairs of the system, but failing to address the fundamental problem of what the qualification looks like, end quote. Ms Nadine Williams from the Department of Employment Skills, Small and Family Business stated that the Commonwealth and state and territory governments have joint responsibility for the VET system. The Commonwealth is responsible for providing funding contributions to the states and territories to support their training systems and operates a number of programs aimed at supporting key priorities such as apprenticeships and literacy and numeracy. We expect there will be a significant role for that department in helping the vocational education sector gear up to meet current and future demand in the aged care sector. This work must include consideration of curriculum design, assessment and quality control. A National Skills Commission is to be established by 1 July 2020. That commission will play a role in monitoring the supply of workers into areas with identical skills shortages. The aged care sector should be identified as an area of critical skill shortage. There needs to be a greater focus on preparing graduates to be work ready in aged care. There need to be opportunities for greater interconnections between undergraduates and industry, including appropriately supported clinical placements. In the medical professions, traditional undergraduate curricula have been slow to deliver graduates that have the skills required to treat the ever-growing cohort of geriatric patients. The current practice of leaving it to clinical placements in geriatrics, which is either not mandatory or in other cases not even offered, must be questioned. Undergraduate medical nursing training must embrace geriatric training as core business. As the demand for aged care increases, more geriatricians will be required. Coordination of geriatric training must be considered at a Council of Australian Governments level, and the Commonwealth needs to be engaged in addressing the likely skill shortage in the same way that it prioritises rural and regional health. More immediately, access to geriatric review and assessment and maintenance of the role of geriatricians in the aged care assessment team process, as outlined yesterday in the evidence of Dr Madison, should be priorities. There's simply no public health benefit in any reduction of access to geriatric services. These services matter to people in residential aged care. We're aware of work being undertaken by the Aged Services Industry Reference Committee. However, changing curricula, course content and delivery mechanisms, both in the VET and higher education sectors, can take considerable time. You'll need to consider options to fast-track this work. The need for minimum education and training qualifications to work in aged care and a requirement for ongoing professional development while employed in the sector will need to be carefully considered. You've heard there could be merit in a registration scheme for aged care workers that, in addition to excluding unsuitable workers, requires the workers in the system to undertake training provided by particular accredited institutions. This already happens in nursing, where the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Accreditation Council approves education providers for a program leading to enrolled nursing registration. It could add to the status of personal care work, thus making it more attractive as a career option. We urge you Commissioners to consider a registration scheme for personal care workers. Such a regime should include requirements around training and continuing professional development of that workforce. The true value of work in aged care is not reflected in terms and conditions of employment, including remuneration and job classification. You've heard evidence of significant differences in remuneration between aged care and other comparable sectors, including healthcare and disability services. These differentials must be addressed to ensure that workers with aptitude, skills and training are attracted to and remain within the aged care sector. the sector must become an employer of choice. Professor Sarah Charlesworth considered that a significant factor which contributes to the undervaluing of aged care work is that caring is seen as what women do innately and for free at home. Consequently, care work is not valued. It's viewed as not requiring any degree of skill when the opposite is true, and it's poorly remunerated with poor working conditions. An example of this is home care workers who are not paid travel time. They're required to travel between clients' homes, but as explained yesterday by Ms Hilton, they are not remunerated for this time. As the primary funder and head of the supply chain, expression used by Professor Charlesworth, the Commonwealth must have a more active role in addressing the remuneration of aged care workers. It was concerning to hear from Mr Paul Gilbert that in his lifetime, and I quote, there have been 3 times that the Commonwealth Government has increased taxpayer subsidies to aged care to improve wages, and not once did that deliver $1 in improved wages, end quote. Commissioners, we expect you will need to make recommendations to address low remuneration in the aged care sector. The issue is complex because wage levels in Australia are primarily set through enterprise bargaining, a system that favours those with bargaining power. As the union panellists explained to the Commission this week, aged care workers don't have much bargaining power. Helpful suggestions have been made during the week. Legislative reform in industrial relations is one. Proactive involvement by the Commonwealth in enterprise bargaining is another. These and other mechanisms require further consideration. Yesterday we heard from a panel of Chief Executive Officers that good governance, leadership and business management will help attract the qualified people to work in aged care roles. Leadership in the sector is crucial. Aged care needs business leaders who can plan and develop an aged care workforce. Management boards need to be composed of people with a mix of skills, including people with clinical expertise. They need to be held accountable. They are responsible for delivering services that are largely paid for by taxpayers. In the Commission's case studies, both this week and in earlier hearings, we've seen how disastrous poor management and governance can be for the safety of residents. Better governance and leadership within the industry could be supported by a regulatory framework that places appropriate emphasis on leadership and governance capability. But regulation alone will not be effective without cultural change in the industry. Commissioners, the Commonwealth appears, on the evidence you've heard, to be missing in action. It needs to demonstrate leadership and commit the resources necessary to build industry competence and to ensure delivery of an aged care system that meets community standards. And it needs to act quickly. There appears to be a lack of leadership and expertise about aged care within the Department of Health. As recommended by Professor Pallairs in Strategic Action 10 of the Task Force report A Matter of Care, there is a need to rebuild the Commonwealth's own aged care workforce and leadership. Mr McCoy, the Acting Chair of the Aged Care Workforce Council, a body charged with implementing the Task Force's 14 strategic actions, outlined a story of poor engagement from the government with that body. He confirmed that without more government support, the capacity to implement the strategic actions of the workforce strategy is poor. This observation was supported by another council member, Ms Hills of Benetas. While there's a key role for industry in workforce planning, the Commonwealth also needs to be active. Funding from its aged care workforce programs has been stripped. Important data and information on what the industry needs is not captured. The Commonwealth's failure to lead in aged care has contributed to the distressing outcomes for care recipients, their families and workers that you continue to hear evidence about. You've heard about the aged care workforce census, which is conducted every 4 years. Commissioners, we don't think this is sufficient for a workforce that is experiencing significant change. The aged and disability sector is expected to grow by approximately 17.8% in the next 5 years and will account for at least 10.9% of all new jobs created in the Australian economy. We need better data about the workforce to facilitate workforce planning, as well as appropriate benchmarking and other transparency and accountability measures. There should be regular publication of this data so that industry can use it for planning purposes. And this more regular data collection should be supplemented with a detailed 5-yearly census on a wider range of variables. The Commonwealth must step forward and take positive responsibility for the aged care workforce in partnership with the sector. This is a large and important part of our community and of our economy. There are projections of significant future demand. The sector provides care to vulnerable old people and is largely funded and regulated by the Commonwealth. The time has come for action. In conclusion, Commissioners, there's a lot of discussion about reform in aged care. There have been many reviews, many papers have been written. What is lacking is sustained and coordinated action. There doesn't appear to be any sense of urgency. The report of the Aged Care Workforce Task Force published last year, A Matter of Care, is comprehensive. We consider that the 14 strategic actions that Professor Pelaez and his task force announced a year ago are broadly on the right track. The blueprint is available. However, the actions are not all being implemented. Where they are being implemented, we're concerned that the structures established to drive reform will be ineffective without assistance. For example, the Workforce Industry Council is struggling to build momentum. It lacks the resourcing and imprimatur of the broader industry and of the Commonwealth. We submit to you that based on the current progress and the structures in place for implementation, there must be real concerns about whether the strategic actions can be achieved in the 3-year timeframe set down by Professor Pelaez. Workforce reform, as contemplated by Professor Pelaez, requires more than band-aid solutions and selective and limited refinements and improvements to the way the current system works. The strategic actions are designed to be implemented together to achieve an appropriate and effective aged care workforce in the medium and longer term. Commissioners, these are all important issues. The challenge now is for this Royal Commission to start focusing on solutions. To this end, we call for written submissions on policy issues relating to the following areas: methods for determining appropriate staffing levels and the appropriate skills mix for aged care, ideas for transforming aged care training and education, a registration scheme for personal care workers, options to resolve low remuneration and poor working conditions, governance, leadership and workforce culture, and the respective role of the Commonwealth and the aged care industry in relation to the aged care workforce. Details of how these submissions may be made will be published early next week on the Royal Commission's website. We may also seek to refine the above questions at that time. Submissions must be provided to the Royal Commission by 6 December 2019, and we anticipate these submissions will be published on the website. However, the Royal Commission reserves the right not to publish submissions or to redact information in submissions before publication. Finally, Commissioners, a word about the interim report. As has already been stated publicly, the text of the interim report prepared by the late Commissioner Tracy and Commissioner Briggs was settled at the end of September. This was necessary to meet publication deadlines for delivery to the Governor-General by the end of this month. The interim report will include information about Commissioner Tracy's and Commissioner Briggs's overall impressions about the aged care system and more detailed analysis about a limited number of topics. The interim report will include reflections on the aged care workforce, given that the issue has permeated all of our hearings and work to date. However, it will not reflect the evidence received at this week's hearing. Commissioners, we had a sobering start this week, honouring the life of our esteemed colleague, the Honourable Richard Tracy, AM RFD QC. We reflected on our time with and memories of Commissioner Tracy. In closing this hearing, with particular relevance to our examination of workforce issues, we reflect on the words of Commissioner Tracy following evidence that was given by 4 aged care workers in the second Adelaide hearing. At that time, the conclusion of their evidence, Commissioner Tracy said, and I quote, "We're enormously grateful to you for bringing us stories from the coalface and giving us a better understanding of what it is like to provide quality care to the aged in this community. And the dedication that you display on a day-to-day basis is something that this community must be exceedingly grateful for." End quote. We've heard in this commission about the challenges facing the aged care sector, but as a community we ought to follow Commissioner Tracy's lead and be exceedingly grateful for the dedication that so many aged care workers display on a day-to-day basis. However, we submit that gratitude needs to mean something in real terms. It needs to mean a safe place to work, it needs to mean respect for that work, it needs to mean that the work is properly valued. If the Commissioners please.
Mr. Rosen, thank you for those closing remarks. Very helpful to enable us to focus on what we've been doing this last week, and I do thank you. I also want to thank the staff, particularly this week, as Mr. Rosen has said. The week began for the staff in a very bleak way, with waking up to learn of the passing of the Chair, Richard Tracy, a personal friend of some of us and a friend who developed for many people here. It has been a difficult week, and you've performed the week very, very well. Thank you very much for your efforts. I must also thank the staff of the Commonwealth Law Building for having made us welcome, and I think more or less everything has run perfectly smoothly, except for one brief incident a moment ago when the due rest button was accidentally triggered by one of the more ably qualified of the lawyers. That was not the fault of the staff, though. So thank you to the Commonwealth Law officers building, and also in particular to the Chief Justice of the Family Court, who has made us welcome and provided facilities for us on the throughout the building, which has enabled us to do a great deal of work both in the hearing room and also at other hours. So thanks all round for all of that. Now, my duty to adjourn the Royal Commission to Mudgee on the 4th of November 2019. If you join, please.
The Royal Commission is now adjourned 4th of November 2019, Monday.